I'm Matt at Nexus Baseball, and this is episode 30 of the Tommy John Epidemic. This series is a YouTube read of content from the book Plague of the Gods, an outsider's perspective on baseball's Tommy John epidemic, which is available now on Amazon. I decided to put this content on YouTube to make the material as accessible as possible. This series examines the science behind the most superhuman action the human body can produce, accelerating a baseball up to 100 miles per hour. There is one key additional component to the smooth transfer of energy from the lower to the upper body. The Serratus muscles can be considered the underappreciated linchpin of the pitching motion. The anterior or front serratus muscles attach to the ribs from the bottom all the way up underneath the large pectoral or chest muscles. They look like thick fingers and are often confused with the ribs themselves. On muscular individuals with low body fat percentages, they can be viewed easily under the pectoral muscles and above the obliques, the side portion of the abs. The posterior or rear serratus is in the mid-back and is hidden under the lats. The posterior or rear serratus is responsible for pulling the ribs down during exhalation or breath out. The anterior or front serratus is responsible for free motion of the scapula around the rib cage, down and forward. The serratus muscles tie the entire kinetic chain in the pitching motion together in a key manner. As the hips are driven into rotation by the legs, the torso remains behind to allow the obliques and lats to stretch and the spine to rotate in the middle portion, called the thoracic spine. This is part of the delayed torso rotation seen in the pitching motion, a known factor in pitching velocity that was termed by Dr. Tom House as hip-shoulder separation. All high-velocity pitchers possess a good deal of this separation, or lag between the two sections of the body. The anterior serratus on the throwing arm side stretches during the pitching motion to allow the scapula to elevate and stretch as far behind the torso as possible. When the hips fire, the spine rotates forward. Without the serratus muscles, at this point, the pitching arm would start to lay back immediately into external rotation. This would require a great deal of spinal flexibility to produce the necessary transfer of energy up the kinetic chain. However, with the serratus muscles, as the spine and chest drive forward, the arm can remain back. The serratus is then stretched to its maximum when the chest turns forward, allowing external rotation to happen behind the body. When the serratus recoils from the stretch and contracts, the shoulder blade is driven forward with great energy that more easily stretches the subscap into the launch position. A mobile and strong serratus anterior allows for both better chaining of the energy from the lower half directly to the torso, takes pressure off the relatively delicate spine, and acts as a safety valve in case of a timing error. If the front foot lands and the arm isn't in the cocked position to enter external rotation, the stretch on the serratus will help raise the scapula and help pull it back into cock and through into layback. Strong abdominal muscles and obliques are required to use the serratus effectively. Without their lower core stability, the ribcage will raise and the serratus will not function as efficiently. The posterior or rear serratus should be active during the whole process, but contracts before the forward drive of the serratus anterior. When it maximally flexes, it raises the ribs up and open to help the work of the serratus anterior. The serratus anterior or front serratus is also a muscle associated with exhalation or breathing out. This is why it is common for athletes in tennis and martial arts to grunt and exhale powerfully. When they do so, the serratus anterior flexes and can drive around the ribs and convey the force of the hips into the arm. A key point with the serratus is that it is only usable effectively with the humerus or upper arm under the height of the clavicle, or the collarbone, as the forward scapular drive completes itself. This is why if you freeze frame any of the most effective pitchers at full arm extension at ball release, the arm is almost always directly sidearm, with the tilt of the torso determining the arm slot. These pitchers are using their serratus muscles to drive the scapula forward under the clavicle with their chest up and forward. The chest also cannot be down during the delivery if the serratus is being used correctly, as its connections are below shoulder height on the ribs. The scapula or shoulder blade cannot be too high in relation to the clavicle or collarbone, as it would compress the subacromial space between the clavicle and the top of the scapula. This space is necessary to allow the coracoid process, a bony extension on the scapula, to rotate forward without hitting the collarbone and the sensitive bursa sac in this area. For this process, the only force necessary from the mid-back is a light pull to keep the scaps and humerus lower than the collarbone. This complex serratus interaction is not recognized by most trainers and described usually as some type of scap load or linked to the inverted W arm position. However, these are just frequent cues to try to make use of the unseen serratus muscles, and not a necessary component to activate them. Boxing and martial arts have known about the powerful serratus muscles for decades, with the serratus anterior being known colloquially as the boxer's muscle. In boxing, the serratus drives the arm forward in the punch to translate the power of the hips to the arm. The classic karate kata for the straight punch, for example, with the arm driving from the chest palm down while the other arm pulls back palm up, is a classic use of the serratus, with one arm loading while the other is driving. The power of the punch only occurs from this nipple height line along the chest that is the approximate middle of the serratus anterior. The karate student is encouraged to drive the arm right along the side of the torso, as the closer the arm, the more serratus can be recruited. The most famous example of a powerful serratus in martial arts is Bruce Lee in the famous 1-inch punch demonstration. Lee placed his fist in front of a man's chest, and without pulling his hand backwards, he stretched his serratus around the torso, cocked his hips, and used his powerful hip turn to translate his hip power through his serratus muscles to the punch, dropping the man to his bottom without his hand ever having been pulled backwards. A key study that validates these conclusions is comparison of kinematic and temporal parameters between different pitch velocity groups by Tomoyuki Matsuo et al. The study looked at 127 healthy college and professional pitchers in 2001 and found the biggest differences between the high velocity and low velocity groups were physical size, maximum shoulder external rotation, less flexion or bend in the front leg, and less forward trunk tilt. Each of these findings is consistent with the material presented in this chapter. Physical size will always be a factor, primarily in the length of the levers, and in populations that do not have maximized mechanical efficiency. Maximum shoulder external rotation is key, as the closer the arm can get to the maximum 180-degree layback in external rotation, the greater the stretch activation response from the subscapularis to drive the ball forward. Less front knee bend is a key element of effective hip rotation, with a strong block to prevent over-rotation. Finally, the less forward trunk tilt is demonstrative of a strong transfer force through the serratus muscles. These muscles only function effectively with the chest in line with the line of force along the ribs, which run forward. All the muscles described that contribute are those that operate in the speed range of force generation. The concept is that as the weight decreases, the speed of the motion can increase. Big muscles do big lifts, small muscles do small lifts. Smaller, less powerful, but more quickly contracting muscles are required to create the incredibly fast arm motion in the baseball pitch, this motion being the fastest possible in the human body. The incredible speed of the motion was never a point of debate, just where the force necessary to create that speed was being generated. Join me for episode 31 next week. Remember, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Your support makes this work possible. Also, if you want to jump ahead, please consider picking up the book on Amazon from the link in the description below. See you next week.